So we're going to do a quick transition planning for students with disabilities on IEP training today. And so sometimes this is also known as Indicator 13. So why is transition important? Well, transition is important not just because this is a compliance factor, but because our students who have disabilities, they tend to have more difficulties when they grow up and when they have graduated than our other kids do. So they tend to have an unemployment rate that is a lot higher than students who don't have disabilities. They are much more likely to live in poverty as adults, and they are much more likely to not get a regular diploma, and they're much more likely to drop out as well. So why we do transition planning is so we can support them. In fact, our entire point of an IEP and having them in school is so that they can be successful once they graduate and they leave us. So that's what our transition planning is for. So when you finish watching this video and taking all of the other parts of this course, you should be able to write a transition plan for a student with a disability that is both compliant and designed so the student will be able to have increased and better outcomes when they leave school. What is transition planning? Well, basically what you're trying to do is to determine what the student wants to do after they graduate in terms of education, post-secondary training, a career, and then in some cases independent living as well. And then every other piece of the IEP is part of that roadmap to get that student to reach that goal. So who gets transition planning after all? All right, so the student is a student with a disability who is aged 13 years or older, or a student who is in 8th grade or higher, and that's because transition planning in an IEP can take the place of something called the next step plan. So if we're going to do that, then it has to be for students who are in the 8th grade or higher. So this is the time that you start the secondary IEP, because all of the things that are different in a secondary IEP are these transition bits. So we don't need to have a secondary IEP for kids who are 12 years old or 11-year-olds. In fact, it makes it a lot harder. So those kids, you do an elementary IEP. If the child is going to be 13 years or old on the day of the IEP, that's when you move to a secondary one. Okay, so the next part is what part of the IEP is transition planning, and the answer is it's most parts. So that includes the student demographic page, the profile page, the measurable post-secondary goal page, graduation options, course of study, goal options, transition services, progress documentation, prior written notice, and last but not least would be the Indicator 13 checklist Form A. So let's talk a little bit about when we start. My recommendation to you is to start at the very beginning of the year when you get your caseload. Check it out, determine who's going to be 13 years or older during the school year and who's going to need this transition planning. Then the next thing I would do is I would conduct an age-appropriate transition assessment with all of them, even if their IEP is not due until December or February, because you never know if you're going to need it a little bit earlier, and you never know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. So my recommendation to you is to go ahead and to do it at the very beginning of the year and then upload it as a file-based document. Now we have to have a transition assessment, and we have a number for you to choose from. One of the most popular ones is something called ONET, and it's going to give you preference, interests, needs, strengths, and then from there you can write your measurable post-secondary goals, which are going to always be education and training and employment. And for our kids who take the alternate assessment, we're also going to add in independent living. From there, you identify the transition services, so specially designed instruction. If you are a special ed teacher, guess what? You are doing specially designed instruction. And then some of our students may have related services as well, and those can be transition services. Anything in the community that they're doing, that would be a transition service, and also employment and some living skills. Now, after you identify those services, you have to write a course of study. So that is the classes that they're going to be taking to get them to where they need to be so they can meet their goals. And we're going to talk a lot more about this when we actually show you part of the IEP. From there, you're going to coordinate with services with adult agencies, so maybe the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. And then last but not least, you're going to write those annual IEP goals. So as I mentioned before, start well before the IEP. You're going to do an age-appropriate transition assessment. Like I said earlier, the ONET is a very popular one, There's also something called a reading-free interest inventory for non-readers, and we have some other examples for you as well. So after you give the student, or after the student takes that assessment, you're going to put the results in two places. You're going to put it in the student profile and on the present levels of performance, because all of our students are going to have a career readiness goal. And then, so what do you do with that transition assessment? Well, that is going to help you, along with, of course, talking with the student. It's going to help you write those measurable post-secondary goals. Now, those post-secondary goals, they occur after the student exits from high school. So that's a big one. It happens after high school, after they leave us. And it has to be measurable, like it really does. And it has to be appropriate. So it's based on current information. And so, for an example, a student wants to be a teacher, then they are on a diploma track with going to college, and then their classes are going to support them in that area. So measurable post-secondary goals are going to be updated annually. So let's do those every single year. Let's do a transition assessment as well. And it's going to include one goal for each outcome. For education, training, that one's combined together, employment, and then, if appropriate, independent living. There's also a specific formula for writing post-secondary goals, and you need to use this formula. It's also in the insert statement, so it's very easy for you to use. And so it starts with something like after high school, after graduation, upon completion of high school. The student will go to community college, go to college, and then where and how. And we're going to show you some examples of these, and we're going to show you some non-examples and some. So let's go ahead and look at a case study. So let's say that we have an 11th grade student who has an exceptionality category of SLD, specific learning disability, in reading, decoding, and reading comprehension. But she's passing all of her classes with accommodation, she works part-time, and she wants to attend college to become a teacher. Let's go ahead and call this person Jillian, for no specific reason whatsoever. Okay, so we're going to play a little game, and you have to say whether it is compliant or a non-compliant post-secondary goal. So it's either a good goal or a bad goal. So for employment, Jillian wants to be a teacher after high school. So is that compliant or not compliant? And that is not compliant. The next one, education. Jillian will meet the criteria for passing Spanish 2 so that she can apply to college where she wants to major in education. Now, is that compliant or not compliant post-secondary goal? And the answer is, it is not compliant. Although definitely we want Jillian to meet the criteria for passing Spanish 2, and that probably will help her get into college at one point. That is not a compliant post-secondary goal, because it's nothing to do with in the future after she graduates from high school, upon graduation of high school. All right, let's look at this one. Upon graduation from high school, Jillian will attend a 4-year college to obtain her undergraduate degree in history and education to become a high school science teacher. Is that compliant or is that non-compliant? And that is a good goal. And it's a good goal because it is all about the future. It's upon graduation from high school, and those are some of the magic words. What Jillian is going to do, attend a 4-year college, even though they don't know which college she's going to attend at this point, and what she's going to be studying as well. So let's go ahead and look at this one. Is this a good post-secondary goal for employment, or is this a bad one? After graduation, Jillian will work part-time as a tutor at Great Success Tutoring to obtain further skills in teaching. And the answer is, that is a compliant goal. That is a good goal. So let's go ahead and look at what a measurable post-secondary goal actually looks like in an IEP. So here you have a blank page of the measurable post-secondary goal page in a secondary IEP. So what do we do next? I've actually tried to make it pretty easy for you. And so you have drop downs. If you click on these three little lines, it looks kind of like a hamburger. It's going to have pre-plumbed just for you and everybody else who uses TieNet the ability to pick one that is very similar and then to be able to edit it. So for example, I can go ahead and click on that one. You can see it pops it straight into that field right there. I can close it, and then I can go ahead and I can choose to edit it at my own will. So maybe we're going to pursue a degree in the field of culinary arts at, let's say, CNN. And voila, you have yourself a measurable post-secondary goal. It has all of the bits and pieces that you need as a case manager, as a special education teacher for your student. It's after high school because it says upon graduation. It's measurable. It's not that this person wants to become a chef. It means that they're going to be working towards that. And they're going to be pursuing a degree in culinary arts at a specific school. So even if you don't have a specific school, you could say something like a community college or something else as well. All right, and then the next thing is to use the transition assessments to use to identify the goal. So we could say ONET, and then we're going to put in the month and the year that this kiddo took it. So I'm going to go ahead and put in July, because it's July right now, 2020. Now some people also put the scores here. It's totally fine to do, but you also can put the scores in the profile page and on the IEP for the career readiness goals. So the next one is the measurable post-secondary goals for employment. I would do the same exact thing. Click here on the insert statements. I've got a bunch of ones in here that you can choose and then just edit as appropriate for your specific student. And then it's going to have the right lingo and the right verbiage that is needed to be a good post-secondary goal and to be compliant. So I'm going to go ahead and click after obtaining a degree in culinary arts. The student is going to gain employment in the field of culinary arts as a chef. And then you have to go ahead and do the transition assessment that you use to identify the goal. So we're going to go say ONET again. July 2020. And because the student is not on the ability pathway, we don't need to do an independent living goal. That's appropriate for students who generally are going to be graduating on an ability pathway diploma. All right, save, done editing. And you are done editing for that specific page. That's it. Pretty simple. Pretty easy, I think. All right, so the next section we're going to look at is graduation options. So we have the standard option, the modified pathway, and the ability pathway. Now the modified pathway used to be known as the career readiness. Now, we want to make sure our graduation options are aligning with our post-secondary goals. So if a student wants to be a veterinarian, then they're going to need to be able to go to a four-year university and then go on to vet school. So chances are they're going to need to be on the standard option. If we happen to have a student who is interested in the veterinary sciences, but who is on the ability pathway, we may want to start looking at other possible interests, or we may want to look at something other than a veterinarian, like maybe a vet tech or something in that area where that might be more of something that is more attainable at that point. So let's go ahead and look on the actual page for this one. Okay, so here we are on the graduation options page of a secondary IEP. And you can see at the top we have the student's planned program of study meets the requirements for, and it's either the standard option, the modified option, which used to be the career readiness option, or the ability option. So I'm going to go ahead just for this one and pick the modified option because it's sort of like a choose your own adventure book. Depending on which one you choose, you may or may not have to answer additional questions. So if we choose the modified option or the ability option, we have to explain why we're choosing that option and why the standard option didn't work and why it wasn't appropriate for that student. The next thing that we have to look at is the projected date of graduation. And you want to make sure that this is accurate, especially if your student is going to be graduating at the end of this year. So we're going to go ahead and change it from this year to next year. Now, is the student on target to meet the graduation requirements? So the answer is either yes or no. So they can be on target, which is great. That means they have all the grades going for them. And it could mean that if there's any testing that's appropriate for their age, that they're passing that. So if we say yes, we just say yes. And if we say no, then we have to say, okay, what are the concerns? So maybe we are talking about, so let's say we're talking about maybe they're missing some credits like PE, math, social studies, and maybe the graduation exam, they need to retake something. So they may need to retake the SBA, the ELA, the English Language Arts. And now we seem to be changing our graduation requirements fairly often, and so this one may not be applicable in a year or two, but hopefully this video will still be out there. And then not only that, we also have to talk about how are we going to address these concerns that we have. So in order to address it, we could say something like the student's going to take credit recovery, maybe they're going to retake the math class in a small group special education setting, and work on practice exams. Now if we look right here, this is services for gifted-only students. Now that's great for the gifted-only students, but right now we're talking about transition planning for students with disabilities. So for our kiddos, unless they are also gifted, we're going to go ahead and click on NA. Now this part right here is one of my favorites. It has the student passed the 11th grade high school graduation assessment. Now when this form was originally created by the state, New Mexico state, a few years back, a lot of years back, it was called the 11th grade high school graduation assessment, and we've gone through a couple of different iterations about what it's called and about when it's taken. It's not always taken in the 11th grade anymore. So this is just translating that in your mind and with the parents that this is the graduation assessments that they have to take. So we either say yes or we say no. And if they say no, what's the plan of action? If you're working with a younger kiddo, their plan of action may be something simpler, like they're going to be taking the high school graduation assessment on the same schedule as their peers. Because if they're right in the 9th grade, they may not have taken it quite yet. But let's say they have taken it. One of the interesting things that if a student is on a so if the student is on a modified or ability pathway, the IEP team can look at those scores they've taken based on all of their tests before, and they can choose what is going to be the passing score. And it's something that we don't exercise as much as we probably should or could, and we definitely need to be putting it in the IEP. So what we want to do is to go ahead and put the date that we were taking all of these. Put the score in, put the proficiency level, and whether they passed or not. And right here in this proficiency level, here is where we can set that particular level. Now we want to be able to make sure that we can explain why and the process we took to get there. So right here it says, does the student need to retake any of the subtests? And the answer is either yes, they do, because maybe they didn't pass, or no, they don't. And then you would identify the subtests. All right, so this next part is very important. Right here, I want everyone to read this. I'm going to be quiet. I want everyone to read this. Students in 12th grade who have completed 4 years of high school and continue to have educational and transition needs. That is what this box is for. All too often we're getting people in the 9th grade, in the 10th grade, in the 6th grade, and case managers are filling out this form, or this part of this form. Do not do that. This is for, once again, students who are in the 12th grade and have taken 4 years or more of high school. So what kind of students are we looking at? We're thinking these are 5th year seniors. These are kids who might be in Kiva. These are kids who might be in Project Search. So this is not your general 7th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, and the kid just in their 4th year of 12th grade. All right, because if we click on this, then this is their conditional certificate of transition, and it is their continuing and transition IEP. So generally, we're always going to be saying that this is a non-graduate and a kiddo on a continuing IEP. There are sometimes we may say that this is a non-graduate and on a transition IEP. And we're going to choose those options if the student is at Kiva, if the student is at Project Search. And then we have to certify that the program and instruction have been appropriate. They have made realistic efforts to meet their IEP goals. The student has successfully completed 4 or more years of high school. So read that before you click it, because if they haven't done that, then you probably don't need to fill this out unless they're going to be a 5th year senior. And lots of times our kids who end up going to the Kiva or end up going to Project Search, they can participate in graduation, and we want to encourage that completely so they can graduate with their cohort. But they come and they stay with us for a few more years. And then you do the expected date of graduation. So it's not going to be this coming year or the year end. It's going to be further on down the road. All right, this last part we're going to go into in a decent amount of detail. Right here is a transition statement. And oftentimes we see people get it wrong because they'll say something like, oh, well, this kid will have a transition statement once they get to high school. And that can't happen. That can't happen at all. We absolutely have to do a transition statement for every student who is 13 years and older. So I'm going to go ahead and transition back and show you a little bit about what a transition statement is. So we're going to go ahead and look at quite a few transition statement case studies and examples. And in each example, the student's name is Jillian for no particular reason. And we're going to start with a little bit of information about Jillian on the left, and then we're going to use that information to create a transition statement. And I want to do this so I can show you that we have a lot of different types of students with disabilities, and their transition statements are not going to all look alike. They're all going to be unique to them. So the first, Jillian, she is a student and she has a mild learning disability whose major instructional needs are in writing, in the areas of organizing ideas and developing sentences and paragraphs. So she would like to attend a technical college and obtain a job using computers. Wow. All right, so here would be a good statement for her. And we have to have it in the IEP at the beginning of when she is 14 years old, and then we update it every year. So we could say something like, Jillian will take courses in computer technology to prepare her to attend technical college and study computer programming. All right. Let's see what the next Jillian has for us. Okay, so this Jillian is a student with a moderate cognitive disability, and her educational needs include basic reading, writing, and math skills related to independent living activities. She also needs to work on self-care and development of social relationships. Jillian would like to work in a daycare center and live in an apartment with another person. So what would be a good transition statement for her? So this one would be, Jillian will participate in a curriculum that addresses functional daily living skills and work skills in order to be able to work and live independently after she completes school. All right, let's look at a different example, a different type of Jillian. All right, so in this example, Jillian has severe physical and cognitive disabilities. She's non-ambulatory and non-verbal, but communicates using smiles and head nods. She will always need adult assistance, and a long-range goal for her is to be able to communicate clearly with a variety of adult assistants. So that gives us a little bit of background about this particular Jillian. So now we can go ahead and we can write the statement. So the statement that you would put in the IEP could be something that looks like this. Jillian will learn a consistent communication system as part of her daily living activities that enable her to communicate her needs to a variety of people who will assist her in an adult environment. All right, let's look at a different one. All right, in this example, the background information that you need to know about this Jillian is that she's depressed and withdrawn in social settings, and she has difficulty interacting with peers and adults. She has artistic ability and hopes to go to college and study graphic arts. She has average grades in most of her classes. All right, so that's her background information. So what we might write in the IEP could look something like this. So that IEP transition statement that would need to be in there starting at age 14 and then modified every year to match what's going on in Jillian's life would be something like, Jillian will complete a college prep course of study that includes art classes so she can enter college and study art. So you can see how this is unique for this particular Jillian. Okay, let's look at another example. This one is Jillian Jr. And this Jillian Jr. is a freshman who has a mild disability, and she wants to be a rock music star when she's done with high school. Okay. So a good transition statement we could write based on the information we have about Jillian Jr. is that Jillian Jr. will follow a course of study that includes all music-related classes her school offers. She will also complete job shadowing in music-related careers to develop skills she will need to obtain her goal of having a career in music after she graduates from high school. She will also investigate a range of other post-secondary options related to her interests and may become alternatives to being a rock star. Because if Jillian Jr. is anything like me, chances are she was never going to be a rock star. All right, so this one is a different example for a different Jillian. She is a high school freshman with a moderate emotional disability, and that includes aggressive and antisocial behaviors. And this particular Jillian, she can't identify any goals after high school. She doesn't know what she wants to be. She doesn't know what's going to go on. She's just trying to get through the day. So you could say something like, she has not identified any post-high school goals, and she's going to complete a course of study to develop basic functional life and independent living skills, and to complete career inventories and job shadows to identify goals for her post-high school lives so that she can hold a job and live independently after high school. All right, and that concludes all of our examples. Okay, for this next part, we're going to talk about transition planning and interagency linkages. And it's really best to look in TINET to show you what those are and to explain what they mean. So hang on for just a second. Okay, so now we're on the Transition Services Interagency Linkages page. All right, so the first one has to do with employment. And what I've gone ahead and done is I have put up some examples of common ones that people use. Now, I don't want you to feel like you are constrained by only using these activities or strategies, because there are so much more than what I have in there. And if you find that you're using some more than others and you find that they're really good, you can let me know and I can add them in the insert statements as well to help generate ideas for other case managers and special ed teachers. So these are the ideas that I have up in there. So maybe research select either a paid or unpaid internship in the area of interest, and then of course you fill out what that area of interest is, you don't just leave it blank. Meet with the DVR counselor, participate in a career fair, create a resume, register with employment service, memorize social security number, that's important. Meet with the Job Corps counselor, select appropriate clothes for a job interview. And if you pull on this, you can open it up and you can see all of those things. And here you have to put in the person or the agency responsible. And it prompts you to put in a name, but what I recommend is you to go ahead and use ID 66, public school staff member. And so that way, when you're talking about how long this is going to be lasting, it's not just that you're going to be the case manager for the next 4 years necessarily. So remember the ID, it's 66, like Route 66, tried to make it easy that way. Click on select, it's gonna pop it in there and you can go ahead and put that in. It also has a non-lookup where you can type something in. I kind of like it when people use the lookups because too often people misspell things. So go ahead and try and use the lookup, but of course you can use the non-lookup if you need to. So again, the ID is 66, like Route 66. Public school staff member. And then it's asking you for the time frame. So I'm going to say, in this case, it's by the end of senior year. And then you have to put in the date of activity. So we're going to say the senior year ends next year in 2022. And one of the things that I've heard that I've really liked about this is like this is a design so when the student is in middle school, it's actually quite large. There are a lot of different activities. And then every time that they go through and they've done something, the next year you take it out. And of course you can add in more things as the kiddo changes and as they grow and they become interested in different things. But it had an idea that you would have a huge list of activities and strategies, and then by the time they graduate, it's all down to 0. So related service, so this is transference of skills into other settings. So all of our related service providers are great and they work towards if the student is going to have a skill in their related services setting, if it's in a special education setting, that they're going to be able to transfer it into other areas because once they leave high school, they're not going to necessarily have a speech language pathologist or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, at least not all the time. So you can go ahead and you can click on the insert statements as well. And there's different ones that may be appropriate given whatever is going on with that particular student. And again, we might end up in an area where they could have possibly have needed mental health agencies, but then now they don't for whatever reason. And so you can take them out as well. And then you use the lookup, you put in at the end of their senior year, or if it's appropriate, you can do it at the end of this year, or if it's appropriate, you can do it at the end of 2 years. It doesn't necessarily have to be by the end of the senior year. There's a lot of flexibility in what you're going to be doing. So the same with community experiences. And again, I want to point out, these are not the only things that you have to choose from. You have to choose from the entire whole wide world. These are just some ideas. Oh, there was register to vote. Always register to vote. File taxes, operate a washer and dryer, that sort of thing. Prepare a meal. Take the ASVAB, register to vote, attend an ACT or SAT test prep, which learn about Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act. That would be very important for a student with a disability. So this one is the student on the DD waiver or the D and E waiver or other. And for most of our students, it's going to be no, because it's not necessarily appropriate for most of our students. However, some of our students who are going to need more services that the DD waiver can provide after they leave us, or even sometimes when they're still with us, then it would be. And the waiting list is very long. It varies, but it's always like around 10 years, sometimes more, sometimes less. So if it looks like the student would be a student who would qualify, so this might be a student who has more high needs, then you would want to encourage the parent to apply early, and it's something that the parent does. So if the answer is no, has the student been referred to the DD waiver or other? And if yes, what's the date of referral? So this next section is, will the student need involvement from any outside agencies? And let's go ahead and say yes. And it could be something simple as DVR, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, will be called in to work with this child. This next section right here is still part of the IEP, and it used to be something that we reported to the state, but we don't anymore. So basically you can go ahead and click on no for each of these, but if you click on yes, that's fine as well. And then once everything is completely filled out, because you know that the pink boxes have to turn yellow, then we can click on Save Done Editing. And this page is almost done. So that is the Transition Planning Interagency Linkages page. And as you can see, it has a lot of information in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next section of transition planning. So let's talk a little bit about the course of study. So it's required. And the IEP team must document all courses and other educational experiences that will help the student reach measurable post-secondary goals. And it includes electives by name, so you can't just say elective. And it's not set in stone. Just because a kiddo chooses something or the IEP team determines something's appropriate in the 9th grade doesn't mean when it rolls around to the 10th grade or the 11th grade IEP that it has to stay the same. And it's probably a good idea to explain to parents that offerings change as well as students' plans. So that's another reason that it might not always be the same. So let's go ahead and look at an actual page, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it should look like. Okay, so here we are on a course of study in a blank IEP. So one thing I want to point out is a change. And it was a change that happened about 2 years ago, but it hasn't necessarily disseminated everywhere. And so this change was, before, we would have this year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then a course of study summary. And we would start it when the child was 9th grade, and 10th grade, and 11th grade, 12th grade. But we got guidance to change. And that change means that we start whatever is in this next year. So let's say that this child is a child who happens to be in 8th grade. We would put the year, school year, 2020 to 2021. Even though this kiddo is in 8th grade, we're going to put what that student will be taking in the 8th grade. Now this is going to be a change for some people because they may not have gotten that information before, but you have it now. So even though this is a change we got about 2 years ago, not everyone seemed to catch it. And it became a problem when we were looking at IEPs, especially when we were trying to go ahead and submit them for our audits. And that's something that we're going to have to do correctly, and we should have done correctly from now on. So if you are starting this in the 7th grade, if the student is 14 years old in the 7th grade, it starts in the 7th grade. If it's starting in the 8th grade, you go ahead and you do the 8th grade, and then the 9th grade, and that's just how it has to roll from now on. So for example, in the 8th grade, this student is taking English Language Arts in the 8th grade. They're taking math. So maybe they're taking pre-algebra or something that's named something different. They're taking social studies, so whatever social studies course is appropriate for that grade. They're taking a science course. Maybe they're taking, and their electives, we're spelling those out. We're not saying the word electives, we're saying band. We're saying computer science. So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the next grade after that. So one thing that you can also use is insert statements. So maybe it's English 9, Algebra 1, PE. I'm just clicking on, New Mexico history, biology, Spanish 1. So this is not the entire course of what's offered at either one of any of our high schools, of course, and it could look differently. But what you want it to do is you want it to be able to match up with that child's transition statement about what they want to do when they when they leave high school. And you want it to be able to be read easily. So that way, if a student moves to a different school, it's easy to see what the intention was. If they move to a different district, it is easy to see what the intention was to put in there as well. So we have a varied curriculum that we offer throughout our district. It's going to look different at different schools. So what you see and take at Mandela is going to be very different than, or well, not very different, but it could look and sound different than perhaps something similar that you take at early college opportunities. So we want to be able to make it as clear as possible as our students move from school to school, as we know that our students tend to do. So then you would go ahead and you would fill in the 10th grade, the 11th grade, and then you can go ahead and fill in the 12th grade as well. And that is the nuts and bolts of the course of study. Again, I want to point out that you're going to start with whatever grade that student is in when they are 13 years old. And you're filling out this secondary IEP for the first time. So that could be your 7th grade year, could be your 8th grade year. And that's different than how a lot of people did it for the past couple of years, even though we've had guidance to the contrary. So a question I often get is, do students actually need an annual goal along with a measurable post-secondary goal to go with their transition? And the answer is yes. And what it says in the law is the purposes of this title is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that's where we have to write these annual goals for all of our students. So an annual goal, it's a goal that addresses the skills the student needs to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And those goals that fully address transition services needs, they create legally defensible IEPs, and they increase positive post-school outcomes. And that's what we're looking for all of our students, is positive post-school outcomes. So we're going to go back and play that game again. I'm going to give you a goal, and I'm going to ask you whether it's good or bad, compliant or non-compliant. So here's the goal. Produce clear and coherent writing in which the development, organization, and style are appropriate to task, purpose, and audience. Well, it doesn't sound bad, but is it compliant or not? And the answer is it's not compliant. It's a bad goal. And let's go ahead and look and see what the next one is, and that'll give us a clue as to what we can do to make them better. Okay, so for this one, is it a good goal or a bad goal? To prepare for employment, given direct instruction for completing an online job application, Jillian will produce clear and coherent written information in the form of a completed job application with 100% accuracy by the end of the first school semester. So is that compliant or not compliant? Is it good or bad? And the answer is it's compliant. It's good. All right, so that's the end of that part of the game. So the annual goals are not surprisingly on the annual goal page, and they are labeled as career readiness. So that's an option you can pick in TiNet, career readiness. So you want to click that one, and then it always must have transition activity checked as well. So transition activity, it's really tiny. It's right underneath. It's right underneath the where you have your goal, so you just have to have a quick look on it so you can see it. All right, so really quickly, here's a note about invitations. Students should always be invited to any meeting that discusses their transition planning. And you have to create a student invitation at the same time you create the parents. So you fill it out, you finalize it, and you provide a written copy to the student. Last but not least, you have that Indicator 13 checklist form. So you have to change the date to the latest annual IEP date when you discuss transition. So let me say that again. You change the date to the latest annual IEP date where you discuss transition. Now let's say you're doing some revision to fix some odd clerical error or something else. You don't need to change the date then because you're not actually talking about transition. Make sure that you read questions 1 through 7 and answer yes. Now if you happen to answer no, that's okay. You go back and you redo the IEP. And you read question 8 and you answer either yes or NA. So that question is, do you need to invite an outside agency? And it's either yes or not applicable. And then the last thing that you need to make sure you do is complete the entire form. We have some folks who have stopped at question 3 and that comes out as being not, that you haven't finished it, not compliant. So please complete the entire form. I want to thank you for watching and participating in this video today, and I hope that you do have a lovely day. Thanks so much.